Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Nun Vav is the last Daf in Maseches Sukkah. It begins by discussing the division of the Lechem Hapanim amongst the various Kohanim that came to the Beis Hamikdash for Sukkot or for any of the Regalim. The Gemara will then go into the question of whether the bracha of Leishiv Basukah goes before Shechianu or after Shechianu, and that's brought in here because we'll bring a proof from our Mishnah to that issue. Then we get to the one Mishnah on the Daf, and the Mishnah describes which Kohanim got to take part of the Lechem Hapanim or the other Karbanos if they weren't really on a Sukkot, but they were on Shabbos, which was close to Sukkot, and these Kohanim came early for Sukkot or left late for Sukkot. It also ends with a story of the famous incident of Miriam Bas Bilga and why her family was penalized, and the Gemara will discuss that, as well as concluding the discussion of which Kohanim take what. So, we begin on the last line on Daf Nun Hey. The Gemara has seen in our last Mishnah that just like the Mishmaros, all 24 shifts of Kohanim came to the Beis Hamikdash and they divided up the Avodah, they also divided up the Lechem Hapanim. So the Gemara wants to know, how do you know, what is the source that they also, all 24, got a piece of the Lechem Hapanim that was brought on Sukkot? So Gemara says it's learned from a Brisa. The Brisa quotes a pasuk. The last pasuk we were just discussing says that all Kohanim are allowed to come whenever they want on the Regalim. That means all Kohanim, although every other week of the year has specific shifts that only they're allowed to work in the Beis Hamikdash during that shift, on the Regalim, on Pesach and Sukkot, and on Shavuos, all Kohanim are allowed to be there. They're all allowed to work. So that very pasuk is followed by a pasuk that says Chelik kechelek yerchelu, that a piece, in accordance with a piece, they take. What does that mean? The Gemara says that means just like that they get a piece of the avodah, they get a piece of the food also. They eat a piece of the food. Now, which food is this referring to? Which eating? If it's talking about eating a karbanos, we don't need a pasuk for that, because we know that whatever karbanos you bring, whatever karbanos you're involved in, you get a piece of. That's always the rule. So since they're allowed to bring part of the karbanos, they're allowed to eat part of the karbanos. So it must be referring to the only eating of karbanos, which has no bringing of the karbanos involved, and that's the lechem hapanim, because they were arranged a week earlier, and therefore none of these Kohanim have anything to do with it, but still they get a piece of it. That's what it must be referring to. So now, the Gemara says, maybe you would think then that it refers to other Kabbanas that are not part of the Regel, other Kabbanas that are just brought this week by coincidence and are not part of the Yom Tov. Gemara says no, because the pasuk continues and it says, Levad mimim karav al ha'avos, except for what we translate as the things that are sold by the fathers. What were sold by the fathers? So sold by the fathers means the things that the shifts of Kohanim split up week by week, and they said, we'll do this week, you do that week. And that's referring to the standard avodas that are done every week of the year. Those are excluded from this chelik echelu. Those are not divided up amongst everybody. Those belong only to the Kohanic group that would be on shift had it not been Yom Tov. Okay, now the Gemara goes into the discussion of when you sit down in the sukkah, and if you have not had an opportunity to say a shechianu on the sukkah yet, like we do, we say the shechianu today only when we come into the sukkah. So, which bracha do you say first? You say the shechianu first, or do you say the leishev basukah first? So the Gemara says in the machlokes between Rav and Rabbi Bar Chana. Rav says you first say the sukkah, and Rabbi Bar Chana says you first say the shechianu. What's the reason? So, the question is, which is more important? Tadir v'she'enei tadir. The fact that one is more common than the other. Shechianu is a more common bracha than leishev basukah, because shechianu you say on every Yom Tov at least. However, the sukkah though is the main mitzvah of the day. This is the Yom Tov of Sukkot. This is the main thing that's happening here. So, perhaps that's more important, even though it's not more commonly said. So Rav says the sukkah is more important, the yom is more important than the fact that it's less common. And Rabbi Bar Chana says no, tadir v'she'enei tadir beats the significance of the day. So I think Gemara wants to compare this to Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai and say that Rav lines up with Beis Shammai and Rabbi Bar Chana lines up with Beis Hillel. What's that Machlokes? Machlokes is when you make Kiddush every week on Shabbos. Which bracha do you say first? Mekadesh Shabbos or Bar Pri Hagafen on the wine? So Beis Hillel says first you say Bar Pri Hagafen on the wine, and then you say Mekadesh Shabbos. And he gives two reasons. Number one, Tadir v'she'enai Tadir. You make the bracha on the wine more often. The bracha of Bar Pri Hagafen is said more often in life than the bracha of Mekadesh Shabbos, because sometimes you drink wine during the week. The second reason is because you can only say Kiddush because you have wine. If you didn't have wine, or at least Hamaitzi, and then they would say the same thing. You say the Hamaitzi before you say the Mekadesh Shabbos. You can only say Kiddush because you have the wine. Therefore, the wine is causing the Kiddush, and therefore the wine should be said first. Now, Beis Shammai says the opposite way. Beis Shammai says you first say the bracha on Mekadesh Shabbos, then you say the Al Hagafen. Then you say the Bar Pri Hagafen, and they also give two reasons. They said the only reason that you have wine here at all, the only reason you're drinking wine now is because of the day of Shabbos. And also Shabbos came first. It was Shabbos before you sat down to make Kiddush and have a Suda. So the Gemara says, so you see that Beis Shammai is saying that the Yom is more important. The day comes first, and the day is what causes the wine. It's more important, even though it's not Tadir. Right? That was Beis Shammai. That was one of Beis Shammai's reasons. And Beis Hillel says, no, Tadir is more important than the fact that this is only caused by the day. So again, Beis Hillel is saying like Rabba Bar Chana that Tadir beats the day, and Beis Shammai is saying like Rav that the day beats the Tadir. The Gemara says not necessarily. Both of them will say I could agree with the other opinion, and that's because both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai have a second reason, and that second reason does not apply to the question of Sukkah versus Zman. One of Beis Hillel's reasons was that the only reason that you have Kiddush now is because you have wine. Without wine, you wouldn't say Kiddush. Well, it's not true to say that without the Shechiyanu, you wouldn't say the bracha on the Sukkah. That's obviously not true. So therefore, you wouldn't have that reason. It could be the Rav would say that. Beis Hillel would agree to me that you say Sukkah before Zman. You don't have the two reasons, and you wouldn't. The reason of Tadir v'she'enai Tadir itself is not enough. You need both reasons, and you don't have the two reasons. Now, Rabba Bar Chana would also say that I could fit into Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai also had two reasons. And the reason of the day coming first does not necessarily apply over here. The Sukkah does not necessarily have to come before the Zman. Okay, now the Gemara now wants to bring a proof to this subject from our Mishnah. The Mishnah had discussed the dividing up of the Lechem HaPanim and the Shtei HaLechem, the special breads that were brought on Shavuos. Now, Lechem HaPanim was matzah, and the Shtei HaLechem was chametz. And the Mishnah had said, Heilich matzah, heilich chametz, and mentioned the Lechem HaPanim first. Now, Lechem HaPanim is far less significant than the Shtei HaLechem of Shavuos, because Lechem HaPanim is not the mitzvah of the day of Shavuos. Lechem HaPanim was actually brought a week before. So, it's less significant. It's not the mitzvah of the day, but it is tadir. It happens more often. It happens every week, and Shtei HaLechem only happens once a week. So this would seem to indicate that since matzah goes before chametz here, that the more common thing, the tadir, goes before the mitzvah of the day, which would be a proof to Rabba Bar Chana. So the Gemara says it's not necessarily a proof, because it's actually a machlokes Tanaim. What the order is, this Mishnah mentioned matzah before chametz. We have a different Mishnah, which quotes Abba Shaul, who says take chametz and then take matzah. So it switches the order. It actually quotes both opinions, and it shows it's a machlokes Tanaim, which one is more important, which one goes first. So it's not necessarily a proof to anybody. Okay, now what is actually the halacha? Which one do you say first, Sukkah or Zman? So Gemara says that Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda said that you say first Zman and then a Sukkah. Or if Sheshes Breder Avidi said you say first Sukkah and then Zman, and the Gemara Paskins, that's the halacha. You say first Sukkah and then Zman. Okay, now we refer back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had mentioned that the shift of Kohanim that was supposed to be on duty this week had not been Yantav. They also bring other Karbonos Tzibur, and they bring everything. So Gemara wants to know, what are these two phrases referring to? So other Karbanos Tzibor, the Gemara says this is referring to a Karban Tzibor which is not necessarily scheduled, such as a Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibor. If the entire or the vast majority or the majority of the Tzibor makes a mistake in halacha based on Psakos and Hedron, they have to bring a special Karban Chatas Tzibor. And if they do Avodah Zarah, they have to bring special Syria Avodah Zarah. Those two are brought by the Kohanim shift that is supposed to be on duty, because that's not related to the Yom Tov. And what is who Makar V'Sakal? He brings everything. That means if the Mizbech is empty, it's not occupied, if there aren't enough voluntary Kabbanas being brought, so nothing's happening, then we have a fund that we buy, that we use to bring other Kabbanos so that the Mizbech should not be empty for a minute. Okay, this concludes the Gemara's commentary on the last Mishnah. Now we start the next and the final Mishnah in Maseches Sukkah, and it discusses what happens to Kohanim who came for Yontif, but it's not Yontif yet. So the Mishnah says, and as it explained by the Gemara, if the first day of Yontif falls out on a Sunday, so that Shabbos comes just before it, and all the Kohanim have to be there for that Shabbos, they can't travel on Shabbos if they want to be there for Sukkah, so they have to be there. Or if the day after Shemini Atzeres is a Shabbos, so that Shemini Atzeres falls on a Friday, so that again the Kohanim can't leave, they have to be there for that Shabbos. These two Shabbosim, the Kohanim have to be there, therefore they all get an equal share. All 24 shifts get an equal share of the Lechem HaPanim that's being given out on that Shabbos, even though that Shabbos is not Yom Tov, but it's connected to Yom Tov, and therefore they all get a right to that. They have to be there. However, if there's a gap of a day, such that the first day of Yontif falls on a Monday, and everybody could have come on Sunday, but some of them came earlier before Shabbos, or Shemini Atzeres falls on a Thursday, so everybody could have left before Shabbos, but some of them stayed over for Shabbos, so those don't get full rights to an equal splitting. The way it works is as follows. There are, of the 12 Lechem HaPanim, 2 are given to these Kohanim who are still here or who came early, and they get a piece of those 2. The other 10 are divided between the ingoing shift and the incoming shift and the outgoing shift. Now, the way it usually worked was that there was a shift change of Kohanim on Shabbos. You had one shift of Kohanim serving for 1 week, then the next shift came and took over the next week. They changed on Shabbos, and they changed in the middle of Shabbos. The outgoing shift did the Karban Tamid Shel Shachris, and then they left, and the incoming shift did the Karban Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim, and they took over from there. And this was on Shabbos. And they also split up the Lechem HaPanim, which was taken out and replaced. The old Lechem HaPanim was replaced on Shabbos, and they brought in the new Lechem HaPanim, and it was divided. The old one was divided up. So it was usually divided, as we shall see further in the Mishnah. All 12 were divided, and this time when 2 of them were set aside for the extra Kohanim who came earlier or stayed late from Yontif, so only 10 were divided, so each shift, the incoming shift and the outgoing shift, got 5. Now, how is it usually? So it's a machlokes. The Tanna Kama says it was usually 6 and 6. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it was usually 5 and 7. The incoming shift got 7, and the outgoing shift got only 5. Now, where did they divide it? So the incoming shift got the place of more prominence. They went to the north of the Azara. That's where Karbanos Kachim were shechted, and therefore it's considered more chashuv. And they divided up over there. The outgoing shift, they got the southern part of the Azara, and they divided up over there. Now the reason that they did it this way was to show that they should remember that the north part of the Azara is the more chashuv place, because the incoming shifts, which is now the main ones, they went to the north. Now there was one situation, there was one family of Kohanim called Beis Bilga. They were penalized by the Chachamim. The Gemara will tell us why, and one of their penalties was they always had to go to the south. Even when they were the incoming shift, they could only divide up in the south. The other penalty that they had was that their locker, they had a locker where they used to keep their shechita knives. Each shift of Kohanim had one. That locker was sealed up, they couldn't use it. And the other thing is that there were 24 rings set in the floor where shechita was performed in the northern part of the Azara, and those rings, their ring was disabled. Now the way that it usually used to work was that the ring was set in the ground, but the ring could swivel, and the ring was open. So you would put the animal's neck into the open part of the ring, and then you would turn the ring so that the opening part was in the ground, and then the animal's neck would be firmly held and ready for shechita in the ring. But their ring was locked, and therefore they had to borrow somebody else's ring, and that was part of the penalty that was imposed on them. Okay, the Gemara explains that it's referring to when we say Shabbos before, we're referring to before the first day and after the last day. And the Gemara says that they were mataking it like this, that they should be able to eat together with the other Kohanim. They should have what to eat. Okay, now, the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the incoming shift got 7 loaves of lechem apanim and the outgoing shift got only 5. Why did the incoming shift get 2 extra ones? So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda it says that this was a reward for them. It was a payment because they would be closing the gates that were opened by the outgoing shift in the morning. So they closed it for them. They did work for them. They did avoda for them. They opened it and they didn't have to close it. Somebody else closed it for them. So as payment for that, they got 2 extra loaves. So the Gemara says, wouldn't they want to just make it 6 and 6? So that they could say, look, you'll get 6 now, and then you'll get 6 when you leave. If you take 7 now, you're only going to get 5 when you leave. So let's just make it 6 and 6. It's a fair trade, and everybody will get 6 and 6. And don't worry about the payment. It'll be a fair trade-off. You don't get any more for it anyway. So Gemara says, no, it's always better to have more now than later, because you could always end up, something could happen, and you're not going to get it. Like, for example, if somebody offers to give you a gift, and he says, listen, I have a pumpkin growing in the ground. You could take it now when it's small, or you could leave it for later and then you could take it then. It's better to take it now because anything could happen. It could get ruined. He could change his mind. There's always more security. Less now is often more worthwhile than more later. Okay, now the Gemara quotes a statement of Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda the Amora. This is what happened with the Karban Musaf of Shabbos. They split. The shift change happened between the Karban Tamid in the morning and the Karban Tamid in the afternoon. What about the Musaf? So Yehuda says that they split the skin. The skin was the only part of a Karban Olah that went to the Kohanim, the hide, and they split it. They each got half of it. So Gemara has 2 kashas on it from 2 brises. The first brisa describes the shift change, and it doesn't say anything about splitting. The Gemara assumes that, therefore, it means it does not split. So the Mishnah says, the outgoing shift did the Karban Tamid Shel Shachas, and it did the Musaf. And the incoming one did the Karban Tamid of the afternoon, and it also did the Bazichin. It did the 2 spoonfuls of spices, which were on top of each row of the Lechem Apanim that had to be burned before anybody could eat anything. They're the ones who did that. Now, the Mishnah doesn't say anything about dividing the skins. The Mishnah is not a kasha. This Mishnah doesn't say anything about dividing at all. It's talking about who did what. It's not talking about dividing which piece they got to keep. So Gemara says, okay, not so fast. There's a brisa, which is a Tana Debei Shmuel, that does talk about dividing, and it also doesn't mention dividing of the skin of the Karban Musaf, and therefore that's a rejection of this. So let's see the brisa. The brisa says that the outgoing Mishmor did the Karban Tamid Shel Shachris, it did the Musaf. The incoming one did the Karban Tamid of Ben Arbaim in the afternoon, and it did the Bezichin. And 4 Kohanim came, 2 from each shift, and they divided up the Lechem HaPanim between them, and they brought it back to their respective families. So you see, it speaks about dividing, and it doesn't say anything about dividing up the skin. So when it says Tiyufta Rav Yehuda Tiyufta, this definitely rejects Rav Yehuda's halacha. Now, the Gemara explains why did the incoming shift divide up their Lechem HaPanim in the north, to show that the north was the more chashav and respectable area. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa which describes what happened with Beis Bilga. Why were they penalized? The Gemara says they had a daughter by the name of Miriam. She was called Miriam Bas Bilga, and she went off and she married a Greek officer. And when the Greek army came and conquered the Beis Hamikdash in the days just before Chanukah, so she came in with them. She went into the Heichal. She took off her sandal and she slapped the side of his back with it, and she said, "Lucas, Lucas," which is Greek for wolf, wolf. Until when are you going to be eating up Klal Yisrael's money, and you're not doing anything for them when they need you? You're in the time of stress. You're not standing up for them. Now, that was a terribly insulting and offensive thing to say, and a horrible thing to do altogether. So when the Chashmonaim won and they took over and they chased out the Greeks, the Chachamim decided to penalize the Bilga family, and therefore they did these 3 things. They locked their ring, and they sealed their locker, and of course, as we've seen, they always had to eat in the south. So Gemara says, why did they penalize the entire family? Just because of her. So Gemara has another version of what they may have done. It could be that they always came late to the avoda, and the family before them, which was called Yeshivav, had to stay longer. So they penalized them that they always have to eat in the south, which by the way means that the family before them, which generally they would have to eat in the south because they were the outgoing shift, they got to eat in the north twice. Both when they came in, they ate in the north because that's what everybody does, and when they left, they ate in the north because the family coming in after them was Bilga, was penalized. So the Gemara says, but the first version that one person in the family did something disrespectful, why was everybody penalized? So the Gemara says, well, her whole immediate family was responsible, because we have a rule, if you hear a child saying something, he heard it from one of his parents, either from the mother or the father, there was obviously a tremendous disrespect to the avoda being shown in that family. The Gemara says, okay, that's her family, what about the entire tzibur? So the Gemara says, woe is to a wicked person and woe is to his neighbor. Just like when somebody has taras on his house, you knock down a part of his house. If it's attached to somebody else's house, you affect his house also. But bad things happen to people who are neighbors with the bad people. Now, on the other hand, Yeshivav, they got a chance to benefit from being close in line to the Bilga family, because like we said, they ate in the north both on the way in and on the way out. Now the Gemara just says that the alternate of Rosh Hashanah is Tov l'tzadik, Tov l'shchena. It's good to be a tzaddik, it's also good to be his neighbor. And Rashi says it's greater is it good to be the neighbor of a tzaddik than it is to be the rasha of the wicked, than it is to be the neighbor of the wicked. Greater is it good to be the neighbor of the tzaddik than it is bad to be the neighbor of the wicked, because meruba midatayva, the measure of good is always greater than the measure of bad. And the pasuk that the Gemara brings to support this is Amru tzaddik hitayv kipri maleim echelu. Seeing and speaking of the tzaddik, being near the tzaddik is good, and you get the benefit of their deeds. Hadron alach meseches sukkah v'hadrach alon meseches sukkah.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.